Thank you, worship team, and good morning, UVF. Good morning. I think I've had an opportunity to say welcome back to many of you here in the Flower Chapel, and so if I haven't, welcome back, and certainly welcome to our juniors and seniors also as well. Change. Say that word with me. Change. One more time. Change. This past Christmas break, I went down to Houston. As some of you know, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and so I think we moved down to Houston, Texas just before my 5th birthday or so. And so most of my Christmas celebrations have actually been in Houston, with the exception of 2. One was at the end of 2020, because you may recall that was a different kind of year, and then one before that. So this past December, it was really fun to get down to Houston to celebrate Christmas. I've often said that it doesn't quite feel like Christmas until the plane touches down in Houston. So I really enjoy that. Most of my siblings, with the exception of one, live in Houston, and it's a little bit of nostalgia. Going back to the street where I grew up, my family moved into that house in about 1984, I believe, which was a good number of years ago. And particularly, it's a little bit of nostalgia, as I said, because there were a few families that are still there that were there before we moved on the block, if you will. And particularly as I just walk down and drive down the road, just remember quite a bit. Certainly, of course, growing up on that street, everything seemed bigger, obviously, but remembering the different stories, if you will, of the different families and how they have gone through different changes, different seasons. Obviously, a lot has happened between mid-'80s and now, whereas they had young families then. Now their children have grown and their grandkids are going to college. Their grandkids are getting married and starting their families. Change. And we all experience change. The change of the calendar from 21 to 22. The change of a semester. Different seasons of life. Marriage. Different roles, if you will. Going from an undergraduate to a graduate student, graduating from undergraduate and entering into the respective field, and beginning a different role of service. Change. And when we think about change, there are many things that come to mind. Certainly, we can think about all of our hopes and aspirations with the change, what we hope will be the reality. We can think about questions, apprehensions, things that we're not quite sure about, we wonder about, we hope it works out. And maybe we could even think about our fears, things that we are really uncertain about, we aren't quite sure will work out, or maybe even worse than that, things that we don't think will work out, things that we think will be detriment, that will not go well. I'd imagine that as we process this common human experience of change, we could identify with the people in our passage here today. Our passage is Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 to 15. And this is a passage where Joshua is leading the children of Israel into a season of change. They have just crossed over the Jordan River, and they're in the Promised Land. And in chapter 6, as you may recall, they're going to take Jericho. But one of the things I'd want to particularly for us to keep in mind is that Joshua does not know the afterword of his obedience. Joshua does not know what's going to happen. So hopes and aspirations, certainly the people have hopes and aspirations. This was the second generation. This has been a long time coming, the Promised Land. You may recall that the children of Israel were in bondage to Egypt for 400 years, and God used Moses to deliver them. And they went across the Red Sea, but that entire generation of fighting age died in the wilderness. The generation that Joshua is leading now is that second generation, the children of that generation. So they grew up, no doubt, hearing the thought about the promised land. So there's been a lot of anticipation about what this will be like. No doubt a lot of dreams of what it would be like. No doubt they heard the stories about how, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. But we would need to pause and really somewhat de-romanticize the idea of the promised land. Yes, the land is promised by God, but there are obstacles in the way. There are challenges in the path to possessing this promised land. So as such, they have hopes and aspirations, they have questions and apprehensions, they have fears. And as we look at this passage, I'd like for us to consider a few things in terms of in Joshua chapter 5, 13 through 15. I'd like for us to consider the perspective and the posture towards that Joshua has towards the Lord and towards what is about to come on the way. So we'll spend some time here in Joshua 5, 13 through 15, but also draw from Joshua 6, Joshua 7, and Joshua 9, because we see some of the challenges that the children of Israel face. And I think they're representative of some of the challenges that perhaps we can or will face in our own new season, whatever that may be, whether it's a new season of a semester, a new season of 2022, or a new season of life. But in this new season, facing difficulty, facing distraction, or even deception, the children of Israel, like we, face these challenges with a perspective and a posture that I think we would want to consider today. I want to share with you a few thoughts entitled, Stay on Mission. Stay on mission. First of all, in thinking about staying on mission, the first consideration is what we have here in our passage, is that God is actively on mission. God is actively working. Notice what we have here in verse 13 of Joshua chapter 5. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have come." So what we have here, Joshua is really right within striking distance of Jericho, and he perhaps is preparing for the battle that will take place the next day. And he, almost by surprise, happens upon this man who was standing there with a drawn sword. Now, a little bit about what we have here. This is, as we'll see in this passage, this is an angel of the Lord who identifies himself as the commander of the Lord's army. There's some commentators really go back and forth on whether or not this is a theophany, that is to say, an appearance of God before the incarnation when Jesus came in the flesh, or whether this is simply the angel of the Lord that is appearing here. But nonetheless, at the bare minimum, this is a representative, a messenger of the Lord, if not the Lord himself. And particularly notice here that he's standing there with sword drawn. Sword drawn. He's a captain of the Lord's army. He's ready for battle. And the particularly significant thing here is that the Lord goes before his people. God is actively at work. The perspective as we enter into a new season, a new semester, a new year of 2022, or a new season of life, the perspective is that God is actively at work. It's not a situation where we need to awaken God from his slumber. We need to get God to somehow get riled up about the situation. God is actively at work. This is significant because in the next chapter of Joshua chapter 6, they're going to face Jericho. Now, a little bit about Jericho. We no doubt have grown up hearing the passage, the story of Jericho, maybe hearing the choral arrangement, Joshua fit the battle at Jericho. Jericho is a significant city. It's a well-fortified city. And to think that the group of nomads, those who've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, are now going to come up to Jericho and take Jericho is really, really quite daunting. Really quite daunting. And you may recall the instructions given to the Israelites in taking Jericho. They're to walk around the city, walk around the walls of the city once for 6 days, and then on the seventh day walk around it 7 times, and then shout, and then the Lord will give the city, give them the land, give them Jericho. And in fact, that's what happens. But what's significant about this is that that's not how you take a city. In the ancient Near East, usually this is really unconventional. Usually you would either dig underneath the wall and then surprise the people that way. You would jump over the wall. You would ram through the wall. But here God does something different. God does something unusual. And oftentimes when we face daunting tasks, daunting impossibilities, we face the challenge of the obstacle of impossible difficulty. What we have here in the passage here, how the commander of the Lord's army, the Lord himself, is going before us to fight our battles. This is significant in the ancient Near East. The idea of going out to battle was very much imbued with theological significance. Israel's God is going before Israel to win Israel's victory. The role of Joshua in the army is in fact to walk in alignment with God and thus to secure the victory. James Hudson Taylor was a missionary to China in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and he faced quite a bit of challenges in bringing the gospel into the inland of China. And his quote about the work of God, he says, there are 3 stages to every great work of God. First, it is impossible. Then it is difficult. Then it is done. So the first understanding about our new season, the first aspect or the perspective that we want to keep in mind is that God is on mission. God is actively working. Whatever your situation, whatever your challenge, whatever the daunting task, whatever the impossibility, the impossible difficulty you may face, God is actively at work. But notice furthermore in our passage, in verse 13, Joshua goes up to this man and he says, are you for us or for our enemies? The response he gives is somewhat curious, where he says, neither. Now, perhaps if you ask someone if they want to go left or right and they say, no, he'd probably say, that's not very helpful. You need to try again. But there, the commander of the Lord's army says, neither. What's significant here is that Joshua, preparing to go into battle in Jericho, he's thinking, is this man, he doesn't know if it's the Lord, or he just sees it as a man with the sword drawn. Is he going to be a problem or a help? But the response from the commander of the Lord's army is significant. He says, neither. Significant there is the commander of the Lord's army says, he says, neither, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. First of all, it reframes a question in terms of, it's not that I'm for your neighbor, for you or for your enemies, but I am the commander of the Lord's army. In essence, he's reframing the question as to who is actually in charge. The Lord is in charge. The commander of the Lord's army. So it almost as if the follow-up question is, on whose side are you? The follow-up question is, it's not so much, is God on our side, as are we on God's side? It speaks of the understanding of mission. That God is on mission, but then secondly, he's invited us to be in alignment with him, to align our hearts with him on his mission. First of all, think about mission. If we were to ask, what is God, how would we say, how would we characterize, how would we describe mission? I like the words of the 8th century BC prophet Micah 6:8, where he says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require? Here's the mission of God: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's the heart of God, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In the New Testament, Jesus communicates the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. The Great Commandment. Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And I think right about there we're tracking with Jesus, but then he adds this part, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love my neighbor? Jesus, have you seen my neighbor? Have you seen my neighbor? Have you experienced my neighbor? My neighbor can be difficult, but this is the heart of God. This is the heart of God. So in terms of the mission, looking at what the commander of the Lord's army says, I'm neither for you or for your enemies, but I'm with the Lord's army. It's really reframing the question, who's in charge? The commander of the Lord's army is not there just to be on Joshua's side. It's a question, will Joshua be on the Lord's side? And so for us, God is actively on a mission. The question is, are we on mission with him? Are we on mission with him? And oftentimes in those moments of change, whether it be a change of a semester, a change of a year, or a change of a season, it gives us the opportunity to take stock, to take inventory, and to say, am I on mission with God? Does my heart grieve for what grieves the Lord's heart? Does my heart yearn for what the Lord's heart yearns for? This is an opportunity for Joshua here. So he experiences this, the commander of the Lord's army, and this sight is so significant that we see what Joshua does here in verse 14. After the angel, identifies himself as commander of the army of the Lord, then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" Joshua has two questions and a response here in verses 14 and 15. He has this posture now of being prostrate before the Lord, before the angel of the Lord, being prostrate on the ground before him and asking, what message does my Lord have for his servant? In facing a new season, as Joshua is here, he's about to go and take Jericho. Significant endeavor, daunting endeavor. He has the proper posture. On his face before the Lord, seeking from the angel of the Lord, what message will the Lord have for me? I was speaking with someone a number of months ago. It was a parent of a high school student really seeking the Lord about this next season. Maybe you recall that experience as well. Thinking about what's next, and they were thinking about a number of different options, whether it be military or a different university or which school, etc. And just speaking with this parent, they were just saying how they were the son was going through this whole experience of trying to discern God's direction for this next season. In that posture of being on one's face before the Lord, saying, what message would my Lord have for his servant? I submit to you that even though we don't like that moment when we don't know exactly what's going on, we don't know exactly what the next step is, we don't have a quick, crisp answer to what's next, I submit to you that posture is powerful. I submit to you that posture where we are submitting ourselves to the Lord and seeking his face, that posture is spiritually formative. Because it goes against the grain of what is communicated to us, that we ourselves are fully in control, that we ourselves are our own God almost, little g. And in that posture of saying, Lord, as Jehoshaphat said, when the armies came against Israel, Lord, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. In that posture where we are seeking him, there's something happening in us. There's something happening as our heart is being aligned with him, more deeply aligned with his purpose, with his heart, with his priorities. I submit to you that that the posture that Joshua has here is quite significant. Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked, what message does my Lord have for his servant? God calls us to align with him on his mission. Now, thinking about the new season, we already mentioned the first challenge, we're going to mention three here. The first challenge that the Israelites faced in Joshua chapter 6 is the obstacle of the impossible difficulty. Jericho's a big city for that time, for that place. Jericho's a significant take. It's a significant city. But they also face some other challenges. And I'm neither a prophet nor a son of a prophet, as Amos says, but I would venture a guess that regardless of what this next year will hold, probably it will hold opportunities to be discouraged by daunting tasks. It may even hold some impossible difficulty. But also, we also see that the Israelites face the pull of distraction. Not only the difficulty of taking Jericho, but also the pull of distraction. So God gives them victory at Jericho, and he gives specific instructions not to take the devoted things. Everything was supposed to be offered up unto the Lord. They weren't supposed to take any of the silver, any of the gold. You may recall that worked out okay, except Achan took some of the devoted things. He was disobedient to the Lord, and this had ramifications for the entire community. When they went up to take Ai, which should have been a very simple take, simple endeavor, simple military task, they weren't able to take it because Achan had taken some of those devoted things. If you will, the distractions. The distractions can be a challenge to staying on mission. Not only the difficulty of the task, but also distractions. If you will, the bright and shiny objects. The bright and shiny objects that capture our attention and seek to turn us away from the heartbeat of God, from the heartbeat of following after God. The bright and shiny objects, the distractions. In this case, those things that God had said, don't do, don't take. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, for everything in the world, the lust of the flesh or the cravings of man, the lust of the eyes and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The bright and shiny objects. In our new season, a challenge that will often come is not only the difficulty, the obstacle of the impossible difficulty, but the pull of distraction. The pull of distraction to lead us away to our own desires that are contrary to God. Our own desires that would want to take the place of God. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16 mentions the pride of life. The pride of life, if you will, thinking about the pride of life is it really, in essence, having pride, taking more pride in what we've done or what we have to the place that it competes with the supremacy of God. The bright and shiny objects. When we look out to the created world and we see created people and created experiences, and we elevate it above the Creator. The distractions. The pull of distraction. The pull of distraction. This is a significant challenge to staying on mission. Because what we see here in Joshua is that Achan took some of the devoted things, and because the children of Israel are in community and so are we, his sin impacted not only him, not only his family, but others as well. He took the devoted things, and that was a challenge to staying on mission. They had to tend to this pull of distraction and then move on. But then secondly, or rather I should say thirdly, there's not only the pull of distraction, there's also the snare of deception. In Joshua chapter 9, we see that the Gibeonites come to Joshua and the Israelites, and they say, we are from far away, when actually they were from nearby. And the instruction of the Lord was for them to be removed, for the Israelites not to make a treaty with them, but to expel them from the land. But the Gibeonites, they realized that the Israelites were being quite successful, and the Lord was giving them victory. So they said, well, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. So they put together this ruse of deception, and they trick Joshua and the Israelites into an agreement to expel them from the land. Deception. Now, we can talk about deception from a human aspect, that oftentimes we'll face deception from human beings. We'll face deception from people who misrepresent the truth. We'll face deception from people who want to manipulate. We'll face that experience where maybe there are individuals who simply see us as, pawns on a chessboard, their chessboard. The snare of deception. But I want to speak about a type of deception that is even more potent than what the Gibeonites did. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. It's a deception of the serpent, crafty and cunning. You may recall in the Garden of Eden, there in Genesis chapter 3, part of the MO of the serpent and the temptation there in the Garden of Eden was to get Adam and Eve to doubt, to deceive them into questioning the veracity of God's word, but even more than that, getting them to question the validity of God's love. Has God said, don't eat this? Well, God knows that the day you eat of it, then you'll really be good. Then you'll really have something. He's trying to keep something from you. And that deception, that moment of deception was enough for the fall to take place, if you will, for Adam and Eve to take of the forbidden fruit. A challenge in staying on mission in this season is maybe more so than even the deception of men and women and people, but it's a deception of the enemy that comes to whisper in our heads and to get us to doubt the love of God. Going through stubborn problems, difficult situations of health, or difficult situations of emotional and mental well-being, the serpent is very crafty and cunning to come alongside and say, God does not hear. God does not see. God does not care. And although we know in our minds, theologically, doctrinally, that's not true, but somehow or another, the deception of the enemy can be so potent in that moment to sideline us, derail us from the mission. So challenges in a new season, new semester, new season, new year can often be the obstacle of the difficult, the impossible obstacle of difficulty, the pull of distraction, and also the snare of deception. But what we see here in our passage of Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15, give us both the perspective and the posture of how to stay on mission in the midst of challenges. Stay on mission in the midst of going into a new chapter and not having all the answers. Stay on mission in the midst of going into a new season and having hopes and aspirations, but also apprehensions and fears. We see how Joshua lays before the angel and says, what would my Lord say to his servant? That posture of seeking to align ourselves to what is in the Lord's heart. But then also notice what we see here. After he asks that question, and the angel says, take off your sandals. Verse 15, the commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Significant about this is typically in the ancient Near East, when someone would go into a temple or a place of worship, a holy shrine, they would take off their shoes so as not to bring impurities, both from a hygienic standpoint, but also ritual impurities into that place of worship. So it was a sign of respect. It was a sign of reverence. You may recall that Moses, in Exodus chapter 3, at the burning bush, God reveals himself to Moses, and Moses encounters God and speaks to him out of the burning bush. And part of what he's to do is to take off his shoes because the place where he's standing is holy ground. This speaks of Joshua responding to the holiness of God. And that's what we have here in all of chapter 5 as well. Chapter 5 is about the Israelites recommitting, consecrating themselves to the Lord. There's the rite of circumcision. There's the observance of the Passover. Why is that significant? I think if we were writing the book of Joshua, probably we would have started with Joshua chapter 6 and the taking of Jericho. Let's just get to it. Let's just get there. This is not only about a destination, it's about spiritual formation. So therefore, what takes place here in chapter 5 is crucially important, where the people, this new generation, is going to commit themselves by following the commandment of the Lord with the rite of circumcision, but also the Passover. And then here, in our passage here of 13 through 15, really laying before the Lord and consecrating themselves to the Lord. Joshua chapter 3, just before Joshua led the people across the Jordan River, Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, he says, consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord will do marvelous things. And the essence of what we have here in this chapter is just that. Consecrate yourself. That's not a word we often use. Consecrate. Refocus. Recenter. Refresh. Recalibrate. Consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord will do marvelous things. And I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up, if you would. And we have just a few moments here, and I just want us to reflect here upon, as I said, change. Change of a semester, change of a year, 2022. For some, a change of a season. For some, maybe things are changing back home in the family dynamic. For some, perhaps there's a change of role. And in those times of change, when we don't quite know what is going on, really what we see here from our passage, the perspective and the posture. First of all, realizing that God is always on a mission. God is actively at work, and we can face the daunting tasks of difficulty. We can face the obstacles of impossible difficulty when we realize that God, the sovereign God, goes before us. And we can stay on mission. As well, we can stay on mission when we answer his call to align our hearts to him, his passion, his desires, his priorities, and follow after him. But thinking about the Israelites here, they've been delivered from bondage. God delivered them. They didn't earn that deliverance. He made a covenant with them, I think 10 commandments. Then he dwelled with them. They earned none of that. Their role is to respond to him in faithfulness. So it is with us in the New Testament, a better covenant built upon better promises. Christ has suffered and died on the cross. He's invited us into new relationship, empowered us by his Spirit, and invites us now to come and experience a fresh and a new life in him. If you will, he invites us to come and consecrate ourselves, refresh and rededicate ourselves. And I think about the words of the psalmist. Psalm 139 says, you have searched me, O Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. Search me, O God. Know my heart. Test me. Know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Perhaps in these next few moments, just invite us to spend some time of reflective prayer, just allowing the Lord to search our hearts, allowing the Lord to shine the spotlight of his Holy Spirit upon our hearts as we think about where are we as we enter a new semester, a new year, perhaps a new season. Where are we with our perspective? Are we trying to get God on our side? Are we aligning ourselves to his heart, his passion, his purpose? Where are we with the distractions? Are the distractions pulling us away? Have we allowed ourselves to fall prey to the deception of the enemy? This is a moment, this is a time when we can allow the Lord to help us consecrate ourselves, because he wants to do marvelous things. So, worship team, if you would lead us, and then I'll come back up in just a few moments and close us in prayer.